So I wanted to thank you all for being here today and attending our webinar. Your commitment and support to Brain Injury Awareness Month and education is greatly appreciated, so thank you again. If you're interested in more ways to get involved for this month, we do have on our website a toolkit that has additional information on how to get involved for Brain Injury Awareness Month. I'll make sure to include that link in the chat. And so if you have any interest, you can check it out later. And then a few quick housekeeping details. Throughout our presentation, there will be opportunities to ask questions. So we ask that when it comes time for that, and you have any questions, to either raise your hand or to send it in chat, and we'll make sure to get that question to Michelle. And then last thing, we will be recording the webinar. And so if you would like to share any details, make sure to not keep them too specific, and you can ask us later for specific details of any individuals. And so without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Michelle Wild. She's the founder and CEO of BEST, so Brain Education Strategies and Technology.
Hi,
Michelle,
thanks, Brianna. Oh, sorry. Go
I was
ahead.
just like, Michelle, if you'd like to get started, I'll go ahead and share the presentation.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us today. I'm excited. We have been doing presentations for Brain Injury Awareness Month for several years. I think Brianna and Heather and I have done this. So I'm really excited, and I'm excited to see so many people participating. So thank you. Our topic today is Boost Your Brain Power, Executive Function in Action. And before I go into some of the specifics, I want to give you a little bit of background on me. The main thing is not really who I am or how long I've been doing it, but that I come at this from a very different perspective. So I am not a medical professional. I'm not a speech and language pathologist or an occupational therapist. I have a master's degree in psychology, but I am an educator. And so my background really comes from now almost 40 years, 39 years of working directly with individuals living with brain injury in an educational environment. So I teach cognitive retraining skills to adults with brain injury, traumatic brain injury, acquired brain injury, etc. So as we do this, you're going to see a definite educational perspective that you may not normally see when people talk about brain injury. And so I just wanted to give you an idea of why I'm approaching it from the perspective that I approach it. So go ahead, Brianna, next. Did it switch? There we go. So we're going to talk about executive function. And I think I like interaction. And so how many of you in the audience, we don't have polls, but if you could just put in the chat, how many of you in the audience today really work or try to work on executive function with the individuals that you work with? I know that there's various and sundry providers and stuff. So how many of you are sort of really consciously aware of executive functioning issues as you are working with your clients? Can't see all the hands, but is there a bunch of hands up there?
Yes, so if the first person, if that's got their hand raised, it looks, if you're able to unmute yourself and you can respond, and then mute yourself once we move on to the next question. So Mary, it looks like you have your hand raised. Oh.
Only because she was asking who works with executive function.
Okay. Well, how do you address, Mary, how do you address executive function challenges? What is it that you see in your environment?
Well, I work more, instead of TBI, I work more with neurodivergency.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of difficulty with initiation, getting started, staying organized, or completing a task, something that's of non-interest. And so a lot of coupling of activities, using timers. Sometimes lists can be overwhelming. It depends on the person or the situation. So writing down achievements instead of creating a list.
Great. Those are all good things. So all the things that you just mentioned, Brianna, if you go on to the next slide, all those things that you just mentioned are we see in brain injury as well. So let's start with the definition of executive function, and then I'll show you a list of some of the executive function areas that we often address. So executive function are those skills that are mental processes that enable us to plan, focus our attention better, remember, and ultimately juggle multiple things at one time. And what tends to happen after a brain injury is that the executive function process gets disrupted. And there can be challenges in any one of the areas of executive function, or more likely than not, in many of the different areas of executive function. And that's why people struggle so much. So if you'll go on to the next slide. So here are just 6 different areas that are kind of traditionally thought of as executive function. You have planning, struggles with planning and organization, struggles with time management and memory, decision making also. And then the other 2 that I didn't get to are mental flexibility and self-control. And I understand that one of the things that Brianna and Heather shared with me is sort of dealing with people, helping people deal with change. That's a very difficult thing after brain injury. That's kind of what we call mental flexibility and self-control. And so when something changes, when something happens and it's unexpected, that can really cause a person with a brain injury to get very confused, to get frustrated, to get angry. And so this idea of mental flexibility and self-control is something that we're going to talk about. I'm really going to kind of focus on that today. And then we're going to move into some of the other executive function skills. Please remember, I'm approaching this again from an educational perspective. So I'll explain why I'm doing and why I'm saying what I'm saying as we go through it, but it may be different than what you're used to seeing. Go ahead, Brianna. I don't think there's any questions yet, hopefully. So let's go ahead and go on to the next one. So from an educational perspective, there is something called the Active Learner's Credo. And the Active Learner's Credo, you can go to the next slide if you want, Brianna. The Active Learner's Credo, I think, is a really important credo for you to understand and for you to share with the individuals that you work with. Okay. What I hear, I forget. What I hear and see, I remember a little. What I hear, see, ask questions about, or discuss with someone else, I begin to understand. And what I hear, see, discuss, and do, I acquire knowledge and skill. And then finally, what I teach to another, I master. So why is this so important? Well, it's important because oftentimes what happens after the brain injury is people listen, but they're not actively engaged. You know, they're sitting there, they're having a conversation, they're listening to the conversation, but then they forget everything that was talked about. Now, that can be a memory problem, of course, but it can also be an attentional problem. It can also be a lot of other things. And so, if all we are doing as learners in general is listening, then it's more likely than not that we are going to forget. If, on the other hand, we engage other senses, right? We have sight, sound, touch, taste, all the different senses. If we try to help the client or in my case, the student, engage some of those other senses, they're more likely to remember certain information. And so how do we get them to engage other senses? Well, you may have them write some stuff down. They may never look at the sheet of paper again, but by engaging that tactile sense can actually help with memory. Okay. The third level here is what I hear and see. So I'm engaging my senses. I ask questions about, or I discuss with someone else, I begin to understand. Learners can't understand what's being presented to them if they're not engaged in either asking questions about it or sharing the information with someone else. And so, how does this apply to you as practitioners or providers? Well, it means that you want to, I think, encourage the individuals that you work with brain injury to ask questions. Sometimes they are shy to ask questions because they don't know what to ask. They don't want to ask questions because they don't want to appear as, as though they don't know. They don't want to ask questions, believe it or not anyone here, of course, but believe it or not, because they're afraid to. Many individuals with brain injuries have had negative experiences with others, and so they're afraid to ask questions. So one way that you can help engage them is to ask questions, encourage them to ask questions, and then discuss what they're learning. Or if you've just had a session with them, I don't know who all the different providers are here, but if you've just had a session with someone, before they leave, kind of summarize it, have them summarize it with you so that you are engaging that. That way they're going to leave feeling heard, potentially. They're going to leave with information that they have started to understand and maybe some notes or whatever. It's just a way to help bridge that gap in some of the struggles and the challenges that they have. The next one is what I hear, see, do, or discuss and do, I acquire knowledge and skill. Again, a lot of times, I don't know, but I give my students strategies all the time. Here's a strat, and I have a whole list of strategies that you're going to get as a result of this workshop. But I give students strategies all the time. If they don't use them, the strategies are not going to be helpful. If they don't talk about them and ask questions about them, you see how all these things kind of interrelate with each other, then they're going to struggle. So it's important for us to, I think, provide strategies to help the clients that you might be working with, and then to engage them, help them do it, ask them how it's going, give them some very specific strategies that they can employ themselves so that they feel like they're accomplishing something. And when they come back to you, if the clients that you see come back to you on a regular basis, this can also develop a very effective rapport with them that often is missing. Okay. And then the final aspect of the active learner's credo is what I teach to another, I master. So one of the things that's really important is if you're talking to them about something, or if you're teaching them a strategy, or you're trying to help them with paperwork or whatever the case might be, encouraging them to go and share that with someone else. Show someone else what they learned while they were talking to you. Teach it to somebody else, share it with someone else, and that information is going to stick again a lot better. So this information is coming from education. This is how people learn. And that's why it's a very different perspective. Go ahead, Brianna, if you want to go to the next one. Does anyone have any questions about this active learner's credo? Can you see why it might be relevant and important? Just sort of those stages. Think about your own interaction with the individual with the brain injury. Do they just sit and listen to what you have to say? Do they ask questions? Are they engaged? Can you help them be more engaged in that way? So I don't see anything in the chat.
Michelle, you have two hands up. Dr. Magda, if I slaughter your name, I apologize. And then Betty Jensen.
Okay, please.
You should be able to unmic. Can we unmic Dr. Magda?
Yes, so the two with the raised hand should be able to ask the question.
Great. I see someone talking, but it looks like it's muted.
You're still on mute right now. Unfortunately, it looks like you might still be on mute. So if you're able to put your question in the chat, so we can make sure we get the answer.
I'm good.
Oh, there we go.
I wouldn't interrupt. Thank you so much. I wouldn't interrupt. Please go
now
ahead.
We can hear you. Please share your thoughts.
I think I just don't want to disturb the flow of the session. I will correct everything at the end and we'll get back again. Please continue. Thank you so much.
Okay. Betty, you have your hand up as well? Did she decide to not? Okay. All right. Well, go ahead,
And
Brianna.
I do see a comment on in the chat that says, with my clients, I utilize the 5WH, 5 Whiskey Hotel, who, what, when, why, where, how, encourage repetition of information in other words or in own words, and request clarification. I always have them repeat the info in their own words.
I think that's great. And the five W's or the five whatever. Yeah, I think that's a part of this. That's part of how you activate this. The thing that I want you to think about with active learning's credo is how engaged the person is. The more engaged the person is, it sounds like whoever wrote that in the chat, it sounds like, encouraging them to repeat it in their own words is a great strategy, because you don't want them to just repeat it back to you in your words, because that doesn't indicate understanding, right? And a lot of times people will just do that so that you move on. So trying to get them to put it in their own words is really important. But I'm going to try and tie this back in to sort of what Brianna said was an important aspect of all of this. If you are having them repeat things back to you in their own words and they struggle with word finding, then that can cause an issue in terms of frustration and stuff. And so in that case, you obviously, and I'm sure you do, you want to give them time. You want to, it may be the case where in that moment that you're asking that question that they are, or, that you're trying to get them to repeat back to you, they may not be able to do it in that moment. And so sometimes pausing is fine, giving them the time and the opportunity to sort of gather their thoughts. One of the biggest struggles that a lot of people have after brain injury is just organizing their thoughts. Think about what their rooms might look like or their kitchen might look like, and they feel very disorganized, their paperwork. A lot of times that's what their thoughts inside their head feel like as well. Like they're just sort of all over the place. And so if we are pressuring them, and again, I'm not saying you're pressuring them because I don't know, I'm just talking in general terms here. If we pressure them with time, we know that because of memory, because of processing speed and attention and all those different things, pressure of time can be very difficult for them. And so that can be something that can that can be a trigger for them. So it may be that you give them some time and you have them write it out. Sometimes it's easier for people after their brain injuries to actually write down their thoughts than it is to keep them inside their head. And so to give them the opportunity to write down what their thoughts are and then respond back to you. Now, that might make your session longer, and I don't know what y'all do, so I'm not quite sure, what the implication of that is, but it may give them more out of it because they are getting more time to sort of process the information.
And so just in the interest of time, we have quite a few questions and chats coming in. So I'm going to give one more from the chat and then one more from the raised hand. And then before we can move to the next spot. But the next
Absolutely.
question is, does this help with dementia and PTS?
It definitely can help with post-traumatic stress. I've worked with many veterans with post-traumatic stress over the years who were not identified as TBI, and they get as much, if not more, out of a lot of this stuff than the veterans that I've worked with TBI. With dementia, I think in early stages of dementia, this information can be helpful. But of course, dementia is one of those things that at some point in time is not going to be helpful, I don't think. So the more that you can do up front and the more that you can help people have strategies in place as the dementia begins to, to I can't think of the right word right now, but as the progress, then I think, it's better, but that can definitely help with post-traumatic stress.
And it looks like the hand went down, so I'll just move. It looks like the next comment is, I use the STAR technique, stop, think, act, and review to assist client with self-regulation.
Yep, that's a great technique. That is a really good tech. We're going to talk about self-regulation next, and we're going to talk about it from a cognitive self-regulation versus an emotional self-regulation. And you can use the same techniques, the STAR technique or the technique I'm going to show you. Different people call it different things. And so what we might find is there may be a few things that I talk about that you could incorporate into your STAR technique that might be helpful. It doesn't matter that you use only one technique. From my philosophy, again, as an educator, I think you want to pull in as many resources as you can for each individual so that you can help them at whatever point they're at. So go ahead and progress the slides. And so I also wanted to talk briefly about the 4 stages of learning. So we're going to talk about 4 stages of learning, and then we're going to talk about self-regulation today. And we may not get through all of the self-regulation today. I know this is a 2-part series, and so the second part is really designed for a lot of strategies and that sort of thing. So let's go to the next slide, Brianna. Oops, keep going. There we go. So the first stage of the learning process is what they call ignorance. And the ignorance stage is when a person is unaware that they don't have the skill. So you don't know what you don't know, essentially. And this happens quite a bit after brain injury. Now, I know the word ignorance is a horrible word. It has a very negative connotation to it. But in this sense, and in the area of education, when we're talking about ignorance, we're not making a value judgment on someone. We are simply recognizing that this person doesn't know what they don't know about something. And so, for instance, after the brain injury, the person may not recognize that they can't do some of the things that they used to be able to do. They still think that they can do it. We were talking, someone mentioned dementia. My mom is 98 years old, going on 99 years old, and she still wants to get up out of her chair and be independent, but she can't. She doesn't know what she doesn't know at this point in time. And so that is something that we need to be aware of. And part of what we want to do is begin to recognize what are some of the things that people are thinking they can do, but maybe they're not really able to do. And then how can we help them come to an awareness of that? So again, after the brain injury, people don't recognize that they may need to do things differently. So just because a person has a brain injury doesn't mean that they won't be able to fill out forms if that's what one of the things is that you do, but it may mean that you have to approach the filling out of the forms differently. Instead of giving them 20 pages of forms and saying, start on page 1, just do it, you may have to group the forms a little bit differently. It's the same questions, but if you chunk the questions differently, it can make a huge difference in how they're able to complete it. And I'll give you some examples of like Social Security. I just filled out some forms for my mom because my dad was a veteran, and there's just question after question after question. It's overwhelming, right? And a person with a brain injury looks at that form and is completely overwhelmed. And what do? They shut down. And when they're overwhelmed and they shut down, what do? Well, they start getting mad. And it's like, why do I have to fill out these forms anyways? This is stupid. I don't have to do this. And then it can escalate. So looking at the forms and breaking the forms up maybe a little bit differently, grouping the questions, not having too many questions on the same page. Now, I know you may not be able to control what your forms look like, but you may be able to help the individual by saying, you know what, let's just start with the first 5 questions. There's a lot here, we get that, but let's start with the first 5. Because as they do the first 5 questions, then they can see that there's a flow and they're able to do it. And now the next 5 questions don't seem quite as overwhelming. The other thing is to be aware of their fatigue, and we're going to talk a little bit about neurofatigue as well. Ignorance can take a while for the person to move out of this stage because oftentimes people don't point out the struggles that the person's having, or they will point out the struggle that the person is having and they won't do it in a more compassionate way. And so that just pulls up the defenses of the person with the brain injury. They get defensive and then they get stuck in this stage, and it's very hard for them to move out of it. So it's possible that an individual can stay in this ignorant stage for quite a while if we can't figure out better ways to help them. Go ahead, Brianna. So the next stage of learning, there's 4. The next stage of learning is what we call awareness. And awareness is when you are aware that you can't do a particular thing. You don't have the skill in that particular area. So you recognize that you can't do something that maybe you used to do before your injury. You don't have, and you really haven't started relearning how to do it, okay, after the injury. Another example is you realize you may need to approach things differently. Remember, this is awareness. This is them going, you know what, things aren't really working the way that I think they should be working. I recognize they're not working. I don't know what to do about it, but I know that I'm struggling. So a lot of people are in this awareness phase, and this is a phase where you can get stuck in also for quite a while because awareness is hard, right? Think about it. I'm sure you all know. All of a sudden you're working with someone and they become aware that they filled the form out wrong or they're struggling with something. And that is a very difficult place to be. And so this awareness stage is a place where a lot of people struggle. They struggle emotionally, they struggle because they're becoming aware of the things that they are struggling with that they can't do anymore or that aren't as easy for them anymore. So the awareness stage is a really important stage. And I think it really requires us to be very compassionate and to be patient and to sort of slowly help them begin to identify that, that it's okay that they are struggling with some things because you know what? The next stage, if you'll go on, Brianna, is the learning stage. And that's when once a person is aware, then they can begin learning. They have to be ready to learn. But once they have that level of awareness, then their mind is open to, okay, what can I do about this? And so the learning phase is when they're able to learn the skill, but it takes a lot of practice and a lot of focus and a lot of time and a lot of attention. It's hard. And someone mentioned earlier initiating steps and stuff. Yeah, in order to learn something, you have to initiate. And initiation is a potential problem for a lot of people after brain injury for a lot of different reasons. Once you're in the learning stage, you have to practice. The person has to just constantly practice this stuff. And I think one way that we as providers or practitioners can help in this is if they're trying, I keep using paperwork because everyone can kind of understand that. If they're working on paperwork for you, they're going to practice that. And, again, breaking it up into a few chunks can be helpful. They're going to practice that for each chunk, helping them see how what they're doing with this paperwork relates to what the end result is or relates to other things that they're doing in their life can also be helpful. Generalization of skills is extremely important, and it's something that a lot of people with brain injury really struggle with. Okay, so learning takes a lot of practice, a lot of time. Some of you may have heard that it takes 10,000 hours to master something new or to learn something new. People get overwhelmed with that. We don't have to master everything. If you'll go on to the next slide, Brianna, the 4th level of learning is mastery. And mastery is when you sort of get to the point where you just kind of do it automatically, right? You don't have to really think about it because you've done it so many times. You've practiced it, over-practiced it, over-learned it to the point where it's just kind of automatic. So a lot of times at the mastery stage, you don't even realize that you're using strategies anymore. And I would assert that for some of us that may not have brain injuries, we go through all these stages. These stages are not unique to brain injury. These stages are general learning stages. So if you think about all the things that you have learned over time, you have mastered some of them, and you may still be in the learning phase of others. You may not choose to master, to get to a level of mastery for every single thing. So for instance, if I'm wanting to learn how to play the guitar, I don't want to be Jimi Hendrix. I don't want to be, Led Zeppelin. I don't want to be all these great guitar players. Mastery is something that you really have to think about what that means. In education, we're talking about it sort of just being more of an automatic thing. So if I'm playing chords or if I'm playing notes on the guitar, I don't have to be, Prince. I can at least play the chords on the guitar. For me, that might be what I consider mastery. I don't have to think about it anymore, but I'm still not, a professional at it. Same thing like with basketball. A lot of times what tends to happen is people, I'll use basketball as an example. People tend to like get to that point where, they're great 3-point shooters or whatever the case might be. And you can't just stop. Once you've mastered something, you have to keep practicing. And so that's one of the things that's really important about the mastery stages. They have to keep practicing. And so I think these 4 stages of learning, you can take from it what you want. You can grab some of this stuff, you can reword it. But I think if you were to share some of this stuff with some of the clients that you work with or the individuals that you work with, this can be helpful information for them because it helps them better understand what they are going through and what they are experiencing. Okay, go ahead, Brianna. So we have a little bit of time for questions here, if there's any thoughts or questions.
So I'll go ahead and start in the chat, and then if people have any questions, again, if you want to raise your hand, we'll enable the mic, and then you'll unmute yourself to ask your question. But the first one in the chat, it looks like might be starting with, I've told stories of past, it helped a lot. Please do not pretend to understand, have them repeat until you do understand. Was a comment.
Okay, yeah.
And
Go
then we
ahead.
have, what about the correlation of acquired auditory processing disorder?
Huge. What a great question. No, auditory processing disorder is a huge factor for a lot of people after brain injury, and they don't even know it. The auditory processing, just like visual processing disorders, it disrupts their ability to learn. It disrupts how they're able to process information that's coming in. And so for a person with auditory processing disorder, they may need to, if it's a recording, they may need to slow it down, not listen to it at a normal, whatever the normal setting is, slow it down. They may need more information on paper versus you keep talking to them. The more you talk to a person with auditory processing disorder, the more potentially confused and overwhelmed and frustrated they're going to get. In fact, at best, it's a few weeks away. I think it's the end of April or the 4th week, maybe in April. But we are going to have an auditory processing, an audiologist who specializes in auditory processing for brain injury as a guest person in our webinar series. So our webinars are free. You're welcome to join. And I'm really excited to bring this person onto our team and to have her share what her experience is with auditory processing and helping people with that after brain injury.
And so we have a comment says, I've now added more letters after my name. I took a year of long coaching training. And this is, let's go to the next one. Oh, someone said that they work with it daily. And then also commented they'd love to be in your webinar.
Great.
The next question, do people move through the learning stages in a linear fashion? Is it possible to run into obstacles and move backwards at times too?
Absolutely. Great insight. Sure. And learning, it's not like this massive learning. You're doing this learning stage thing for everything that you're doing. That's part of why learning is so overwhelming and it takes so long. You can be at the ignorance stage of learning for some things in your life and be at the self-awareness stage and other places in your life and in the learning phase and the mastery. So it's sort of kind of all over the place. And that's why learning is so difficult. But sometimes my experience has been over the years that by helping individuals with brain injuries understand that there are these stages and that they're legitimate stages, that it's not just them that goes through some of these frustrations. It's not just them that, figures out all of a sudden that they can't do something. I like woodworking, and many years ago I started woodworking, and I didn't know what I didn't know, and I can't even tell you how much wood I destroyed unfortunately, because I didn't know what I didn't know. I'm like, I can do this looks simple, I got a plan, and I just started in, and I didn't know what I didn't know. I was ignorant to that. And so as I began to realize, oh, you know what, I'm wasting a lot of wood, or oh, whatever the things were, all of a sudden I have this awareness. And then I started figuring out, okay, I need to approach this differently. And I learned differently than, a lot of other people. And so I realized at that point in time that I had to go, I had to start learning how to do this in the way that made the most sense for me and was most effective for me. That's one other thing I'll say about learning, and then we'll move on to our self-regulation. Everyone learns differently. So, in school, at college, lecture is a very, it's sort of the standard way of doing things. Well, a lot of people don't learn by lecture. Why don't they learn by lecture? Let's go back to the active learner's credo for a moment. What I hear, I forget. Right. So if you're just sitting in a lecture and you're not engaging and you're not asking questions like some of you are, then it's likely that people will forget. And so you want to try and be as engaged as possible.
All right, so we have another comment that before a major stroke, I had a learning disabilities that made progress more difficult. And, and
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Yeah. So if you have a learning challenge, whatever it might be, and then you have a brain injury or you have a stroke or something on top of that, then yeah, it is going to impact that. And in some cases, I would argue that for a lot of people after a brain injury or a stroke, that you have to learn differently. The way in which you learn often changes. And that can be a big frustration for people as well, because they keep trying to do it the way they always did it, and it's not working the same way. And so again, that's where you get frustration and anger and, some behavioral issues that may come out as a result of that.
So I don't see any other questions or comments in the chat or any hands raised at this time. So we can move on to the next one, and then we'll see if we have any more on the next pause.
Absolutely. So we're going to talk about self-regulation. I know someone was talking in the chat or earlier mentioned self-regulation, sort of the emotional self-regulation, that STAR approach. If you'll go on, Brianna. I do encourage, I would love conversation on this, because I think this is, an important topic, and it definitely relates to the frustration that people experience and how it gets expressed. Okay. So I'm just going to give you a very simple definition of self-regulation, and it's coming from a cognitive self-regulation. So self-regulation from a cognitive perspective is the ability to control your behavior through establishing a plan, recognizing and monitoring your progress, evaluating the outcome of whatever the situation was, and then eventually, and this takes a lot of time and a lot of practice, eventually to reflect throughout the entire process. So I'm going to break this down into individual steps. We're going to talk about each one. I'm going to give you some questions that you can ask yourself and questions that you can encourage and ask the clients or whomever you might work with, because I think these questions can really help us focus in and can really help us redirect when we need to be redirected. So go ahead, Brianna. So this is just a bigger picture of that self-regulation process. You can go on one more. So here are some examples of self-regulation in daily life. So this is where self-regulation can be helpful, okay? Preparing for a doctor's appointment. if you don't prepare for a doctor's appointment, then it can cause a lot of frustration, right? You don't know what questions you need to ask the doctor. And so you get there, or the doctor walks in and asks you how you're doing and how your kids are. And all of a sudden, everything that was in your head that you wanted to talk to the doctor about is now gone. Okay. So you want to be prepared for doctor's appointments. Even something like going to the market or shopping. One of the things that happens for people after brain injuries is if they're not prepared to go shopping, they will go in and they will actually end up being in there for a very long time when they don't need to be, because they don't have a plan. They go to the shopping, they go to the market at a time of day that's not a good day, not a good time because of traffic. Or they go at a time of day that's not a good time for them because of their sort of energy cycles throughout the day. This is where cognitive self-regulation can play a significant role. Even things like reading, having a plan for reading and monitoring, how am I doing? Should I keep going or should I stop? We'll talk about these phases in just a moment. Going out with friends and family. If you go to a very noisy restaurant, almost guaranteed it's going to overwhelm the person with a brain injury. And so if you're going to go out with friends and family, where can you go that's more quiet, more intimate, more, something that's not going to be so distracting for you? Even something like the size of the menu can disrupt or overwhelm a person with a brain injury. Just like I was telling you with filling out forms, right? If you give them a 20-page packet of forms or questions that they have to fill out, they are just going to get overwhelmed almost immediately. Cleaning the house, making phone calls, preparing meals, and also preparing for difficult or emotionally charged situations. We don't always know when we're going to have an emotionally charged situation, but we can anticipate some of those situations. Okay. So for instance, if I go see Uncle Joe and I know Uncle Joe annoys me or never listens to me or, whatever the case might be, I need to be prepared for that. And so cognitive self-regulation is, let's have a plan for whenever we see Uncle Joe, here's how we're going to approach that. Or if we're going to be at a family gathering and Uncle Joe is going to be there, then, we can have our plan in place. Go ahead, Brianna. So the first phase of self-regulation is where you set the stage for learning. You set the stage for engaging in whatever the thing is that you're going to do. Okay. And there are 4 questions that I propose that you ask, and I get these from all sorts of different places. My tendency as an educator is I get all these different resources and then I sort of mix them up and make them something a little bit different than the original. So the first question that I think is really important to ask, and that is, what's my purpose? What's my purpose for going to the market? Well, if my purpose in going to the market is to get 3 items for dinner, then that's very different than if I'm going to get groceries for a week. What is my purpose? That is really important. And it may be that as a provider or as a survivor, depending on, where you're at, if you're a provider, maybe you start your session with, okay, what's our purpose today? Right? Let people know that sets the stage for the whole thing. And for a lot of time, or for a lot of people after brain injury, if they don't know what to expect or anticipate, then they get overwhelmed very, very easily. So sitting down with someone and saying, here, what's our purpose for today? Or, Brianna, I might say, okay, Brianna, we're meeting. Here's my purpose. What's your purpose? Let's make sure that we're talking about the same thing. Because if you're talking about emotional self-regulation and frustration and change and how do you deal with that, make sure you're both on the same page before you even get started. That's an important place to start, is to make sure that you're on the same page. Because it is possible, and sometimes likely, that you're not even on the same page. And if you can end up starting on the same page, then I think some of the frustration and feelings of overwhelmed and all that can be remedied to a certain extent. I always tell people, write your purpose down, because after the brain injury, people forget their purpose. and or their purpose sort of changes over the course of the appointment. And so if Brianna and I are meeting and we've said, okay, here's our purpose, and we get off track, right? We go off on one of the branches, then by writing down what's your purpose, it's setting the stage for that appointment, and it allows you, if you're the provider, it allows you to redirect back to why they were there. It also, if you're a survivor, this is really important because you are not the only one that can like go off on tangents, right? Your provider can go off on tangents. And so if you write your purpose down, guess what? Now you can bring your provider back on track and say, I appreciate that, but here's what I needed to get done today. That just being able to do that can make a huge difference in how people perceive the assistance that they're getting and how they react to that. So the second question of the planning phase is, what do I know from my previous experience? Sorry, my little graphic cut that off. But what do I know from my previous experience? What do I know about meeting with Brianna the last time? Well, I know that, she was checking her phone all the time and, this, that, or the other. Okay, I know that. Right? If I stop and I say, okay, what do I know about this situation? I know that this is happening. Now, what's my plan? How am I going to address that? Well, if I'm a provider, I may say, you know what, Brianna, I think we should both turn our phones on focus for our meeting so that we don't get distracted by it. Do you see the difference in that? It's not like, Brianna, you were on your phone the whole time last time. You need to not do that this time. That's just going to set her off. But to be able to say, something like, I've noticed that I tend to get distracted by my phone when I'm in sessions or whatever. Let's both put our phones on focus and we'll see how that helps us. That becomes part of my plan as I'm working with the person. So what's my purpose? What do I already know from previous experience? What's my plan? How am I going to approach this? So my plan might be, well, if I'm going to the market, my plan is I'm going to go to the market at, 8:30 in the morning, because that's a really good time of the morning for me. And there's people are sleeping or at work. And so therefore 8:30 might be a good time to go to the market. So you establish a plan. Another part of your, a strategy that you might use going on to the next question was like, I'm going to have a shopping list. And, my plan is I'm only going to buy what's on my shopping list. My strategy is I'm going to have a shopping list so that I don't, get overwhelmed. A friend just came over last night and she brought me something and I said something and she goes, oh yeah, I went to the store and I was intending to buy a $5 item and I left there with $150 worth of stuff. We all do this, right? But it can be so much more, so much more difficult and so much more disruptive after the brain injury. Okay, go ahead, Brianna, if you want to jump to the next one. So we just talked about the planning phase. There's those 4 questions that are part of the planning phase. The monitoring phase is the next phase. And the monitoring phase is your check-in phase. Okay. The monitoring phase is when you are asking yourself questions like, am I using the strategies? Right? Did I bring my bags with me? So you get to the parking lot of the grocery store and you start to walk in, you check in with yourself. Okay, what do I need to do? Do I have my bags? Oh, no, I don't. I got to go back and get them from the car. The monitoring phase is you checking in with yourself while you're actually engaged in the process. So for those of you that might be providers, if you're meeting with veterans with TBI, check in. Don't just proceed based on your plan because that was your plan, because the veteran may no longer be able to follow the plan, right? The veteran may be stuck on question 5 and you're on question 10. And so checking in, monitoring just means me checking in with Brianna. Hey, Brianna, how are you feeling about the meeting? Or, I know that we're going a little bit faster. How do you feel? Do we need to slow down? Do we need to speed up? Engage the veteran in that process. That helps them feel heard. And I know there are lots of reasons why people get frustrated and annoyed and all that, but I can tell you from my work in BEST and from talking to thousands of people with brain injuries, one of the most frustrating things is that they don't feel like they're being heard. They don't feel like they are being acknowledged and recognized and heard. And so part of this process of self-regulation and why I'm approaching it, not just, a lot of people think, well, I need to make my client be better at self-regulation. I'm telling you, no, you need to be better at self-regulation too. We need to be better at it together from different perspectives. So during this check-in phase, you're in the middle of it, right? You're in the middle of your meeting and you just sort of check in and you see, how's it going? Am I using the strategies as planned? Am I staying focused? If I'm not staying focused, then what's distracting me? And if I know what's distracting me, my phone keeps vibrating or whatever, then I may need to adjust while I'm in the middle of that thing. And a lot of times people struggle with adjusting. But if you have your plan laid out and if you can get to the point where you're monitoring, then it's better to adjust than it is to just barrel on through things. That's my perspective. Okay. So if you're if you're doing something and you recognize, geez, I'm really tired, or, I'm 10 questions behind Brianna as we're going through this paperwork together, you got to stop and recognize that. That's the monitoring phase. You're checking in. And then I need to tell Brianna, you're a little bit ahead of me. Can we slow down? Right? That can help with this emotional self-regulation. That's how all this kind of ties in together. I hope this is helping you. I hope I'm making that connection for you. Go ahead, Brianna, to the next one. The evaluation phase is the review. And, it may only take 2 or 3 minutes, but at the end of your session, maybe you evaluate. How did today go for you? Right? And, did our plan work, or maybe we need to change it next time? Maybe we need to approach things a little bit. Did our strategies work? Well, I put my phone on vibrate because I thought that would be really good, but then it was vibrating in my pocket and it was annoying me. Okay, well, then next time you need to do it differently, right? Maybe you put your focus feature on so that nothing comes through unless it's an emergency, right? There are other strategies that you can use. And so that's what this evaluation phase is all about, is let's review what happened, how did it go, what might we need to change next time? Go ahead, Brianna, if you want. And then the last phase, it's not really a phase, but it's sort of what happens throughout the entire process, is what they call reflection. And reflection is sort of that awareness stuff that we were talking about that just sort of is always there. Sort of like that metacognition, sort of always being on, always sort of thinking about it, being aware of what's going on around you. That's really hard. That comes with a ton of practice. That comes with mastery, not with, not with just the learning phase. So reflection is a really important part of this whole process, but it's also not something that I think you should expect to happen right away, because it will not. The other 3 phases, plan, monitor, evaluate, you can implement those right away. You have to learn, you have to practice, you're going to make mistakes, but those strategies can be very helpful, or those stages can be very helpful right off the bat. Reflection is something that just comes with time and practice. Okay, go ahead, Brianna. And then what happens is you take what you've learned from that evaluation, and now the next time Brianna and I meet, guess what? We set our plan, we set our purpose, we ask, here's the strategy. You know what? Last time the strategy didn't work so well. I'm going to change it. That's self-regulation 2.0. Okay. So with every iteration of self-regulation, you get more clarity. You get, I think my experience has been that, you tend to be less frustrated and less overwhelmed because you always have a purpose and you're always looking at what you know so that you can anticipate certain things and not be surprised by them all the time. Okay, so that's what I had for today. That's as far as I was wanting to get for today. So I'm open to questions and stuff. I hope that this is helpful information for you. I definitely want to know that, because I hope some of you will join, or all of you will join us next week. And I want to make sure that, what I'm doing in my approach is beneficial to you. So How are we doing, Brianna?
You have one hand up, Michelle.
Okay.
You should be able to unmute.
Michelle Murray?
Correct.
Yes, I didn't know this was for providers. I'm a veteran, but I'm glad I came because I felt very seen today. I have PTS and depression, and for a long time, I thought that's what was impacting my life so that I couldn't move forward. But I haven't been in active PTSD or depression for a few months now. I'm an intelligent person. I'm a capable person, but I just can't like move forward, like have a schedule, have a routine, and do the things I want to do in my life. And I'm beginning to recognize in the last few weeks my untreated mild TBI is what's been impacting me. And everything you talked about today, I was just sitting here going, yes, yes, yes. And, you know, it's not just me, but I think sometimes when veterans have overlapping issues like PTS and mild TBI, not only do we miss it, but providers miss it too. And so we're treating one thing and we're not making progress. And it's like, well, because we're not treating the co-occurring issue. And for a long time, I thought there was just something really wrong with me. And now I realize it's just a deficit and it can be helped. And thank you for doing this, even though it's for providers. I'm glad I came because I just feel hope.
Well, thank you, Michelle. I appreciate you sharing that. And, you know, I don't know who the audience is. There's not enough time to, you know, it would have been nice to know, okay, how many of you are this and how many of you are that. So I wanted to try and provide examples from both sides. And I hope one of the things that's helpful for you, Michelle, as a veteran with a TBI and, you know, PTS, even though it might not be active right now, that you can see that there are things you can do to help your provider and that providers can do some things that can help you too. And this information that I'm sharing is just sort of basic fundamental information that I think everyone should be aware of. And, you know, I teach it all the time because it's that important. And so I'm really glad that you came. And if you can come next week, I hope that you'll come because we're going to talk about strategies next week. And the strategies will be very helpful to you. And I hope also helpful to the providers in that they will then be able to offer some of these strategies to the veterans that they're working with. So thank you, Michelle. And also, if you're a veteran and you know you have a TBI, please check out the Best Connections website because we do offer free webinars twice a month. So I would love to have you join us.
I started doing that and I don't know how to put my hand down. So if you can do that for me.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your very kind comments. I'm so glad that you found it beneficial.
Thank you.
Right, so it looks like we have some comments and we'll wrap up pretty quickly because I do know we're past time, but someone said, never thought of these as part of self-regulation. I generally think of SR as mood and behavior. And then someone also commented they have always requested neuropsych eval for TBI clients. This allows us to see the deficits. I worked in TBI rehab for several years. We have additional comments. I don't think we'll have time to go over them all together right now, but we'll make sure to review those and hopefully see you next week or do some follow-up if need be. But I just want to close out and again say thank you everybody for attending. Thank you, Michelle, for presenting today. We really appreciate you taking the time to do this webinar. I also want to remind everyone that we'll be sending out an email that will include a survey. And within that survey, if you can indicate you would like to receive a training certificate. So make sure to fill those out and we can send those your way. Again, thank you, everybody. We hope to see you next week. If you enjoyed this webinar, we hope that we can see you in kind of two different aspects. One would be our WDVA's VTSC Veteran Training Support Center that has additional trainings beyond brain injury, and then Michelle's organization, bestconnections.org, is a good resource as well for additional webinars if you have any interest. that is all for now. And again, I hope we see you all next week. And if there's any questions that we missed today, please feel free to contact us, and we'd be happy to make sure that we get those answered. Thank you so
I put my
much.
email in the chat, so if people have questions or want to reach out to me individually, I would be more than happy to do that. And I also love the Flappy Bird Syndrome comment. That is awesome. I may have to use that in the future. Thank you, Kimberly. Thanks everyone for joining us.